All right, good evening, folks. Welcome. Welcome to the Autumn Tactics for Big Specks, Unlocking the Texas Coast. It's a title so good, it's on two Post-it notes. Thank you all again for joining us today. Um, I'm going to start with introducing myself and go through some logistics. We'll talk about our speaker, and then we'll get going. So for the next hour, um, yeah, should be a good time. So my name is Adam Comer. I'm the Aquatic Education Manager with Texas Parks and Wildlife. Um, During the webinar, all that are attending, so you're going to be on mute. You can't go off mute, and then you don't have a webcam. We do have a chat button, but there won't be any chat function, so you can't chat between each other or myself. If you do have a question for our speaker, there is a question box. You can submit those throughout the talk, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end. We'll have a couple of polls during the presentation. They're just for fun, no pressure. I did want to briefly just share, kind of give some information about the program that I manage. So again, I mentioned I'm the Aquatic Education Manager. So if you are aware, some of our volunteer instructors are probably joining us tonight. For those that don't know, if you go to the Texas Parks and Wildlife homepage, click on Education. At the top here, it's Angler Education. So our program here, we have on this site, we have some learn to fish, where to fish, and then teach fishing. We are a volunteer facilitated program. We train community members, teachers, scout leaders, folks from all types of backgrounds. Anybody over 18 that's a Texas resident can take one of our free Angler Ed instructor workshops and begin engaging your community, teaching your community about fishing. And we provide free resources and a volunteer network throughout Texas to help you with that. I encourage you guys, we will be sending a follow-up email that will be links to check our training calendar out and to learn a little more about becoming or being an Angler Ed instructor. On to why you're here. So I wanted to introduce our speaker today. So Chris Bush has a passion for catching monster speckled trout, which he has done successfully all over the Gulf Coast. He is the creator of the Speckled Truth blog podcast that is dedicated to big trout tactics and conservation. I want to thank Chris for being here. With that, Chris, you're good to go. You're ready.
Great. Hey, thanks, Adam. First off, everyone, welcome. Want to do a quick sound check, Adam. Can you still hear me?
I can. You're good.
Okay, wonderful. So why you're here, chances are if you're like me, you like to target really big speckled trout. And those who follow me on Speckled Truth and the guideposts and my social media, man, it is a passion. It's truly a labor of love. And so when I was doing my skill bridge opportunity with Adam, Miss Melissa Felty in the communications division there at TPWD, when I was exiting the Air Force, we were kind of talking and we wanted to do this. And what better time to do this than really in September? Literally tomorrow is the 1st of October, and we're really staring there on the gun barrel of fall fishing. Even though it hasn't quite cooled off yet, we're still looking right down the center. And so what better time to talk about, really targeting some of these bigger fish, certainly in fall. And so I wanted to kind of go through a couple of things. So the first, it's a real brief overview of kind of where they live, how they behave, and then lastly, how to catch them. The first two are really important, and that's really what we dive a lot into with Speckled Truth. Just being enamored with really a fish that roams our waters, how big they can get, how really nuanced they can get. Again, the passion to target them has been really fun. And part of that kind of passion is studying, again, where they live and how they behave. And I'll share some of that here shortly. But I say all that to say, let's start with, where they live. And so this is directly from the 4 areas. So the sandy areas, oyster beds, seagrass beds, and deep water. If you went out to the TPWC and TPWD website and looked at spotted sea trout, or Synosia nebulosa, their scientific name, if you looked at their habitat range, these are primarily kind of their 4 areas. I wanted to have all these up here, not only where they live, but also to how it relates to the next slides as it relates to autumn fishing and how to target them. So again, sandy areas, if you think about this, I fish primarily kind of in the upper Laguna Madre, Baffin Bay complex, if you will. And so it is one of those areas that has so much structure and a wide variance of structure. So sandy areas obviously goes without saying. Oyster beds or kind of hard substrate bottoms, so live oyster beds in Baffin, we have the serpulid reefs, which is worm rock, and so again, kind of a living reef-ish, but also too really a hard bottom structure. And in far bottom right, seagrass beds, so upper Laguna Madre, lower Laguna Madre, even a little bit in Matagorda that's coming back, but primarily let's say upper Laguna Madre and lower Laguna Madre. Texas waters and kind of the nuance, fishery that we have here, it's prolific because we have so many dense seagrass beds and variety of different seagrasses. And so not all of them are kind of created equal per se. And so they do vary again from kind of base system to base system. So I won't go into the nuance there, but I say all that to say seagrass beds are kind of where they're at. And then lastly, deep water. If again, fishing Baffin Bay, it's a little bit more of a deeper water estuary versus like the lower Laguna Madre or even the upper Laguna Madre, where you can really wade for miles and miles, and it has a lot of kind of shallow water. That's why it has such prolific, seagrass growth. But I say all that to say we do have a huge intercoastal waterway that kind of dissects a lot of our base systems, really starting again from the Sabine area in the upper coast all the way down to Brownsville and the Brownsville Ship Channel, right? And the intercoastal waterway kind of just again kind of cuts through. And off of that, you have crash canals, which are, from oil and gas, and you have other kind of natural kind of deeper water areas. Again, in Baffin proper, we have a little bit more of a deeper water area with those serpulid reefs because it is a hypersaline situation. But I say all that to say, is this is where they live. They occupy all these areas. And the great part about it is that they can occupy all these at the same time. But if you want to target some of these bigger fish, there are different areas and times of year, and that's what we want to talk about today, right? So this is really a strategic map overlay, or I'm sorry, a satellite map overlay of Penascal Point. It's a very known spot, if you will, in Baffin Bay, right on the mouth of Baffin on the southern shoreline. And if you see the yellow kind of star, yellow X here, and the darker shade, that is your kind of seagrass beds. And then out here off of, this ledge is your kind of rock, so your harder substrate. That's there, one, just through satellite mapping. You can buy, other navigational maps, and you can kind of see where, some of these rock formations are out there. And so, but in Penascal Point in particular, there are off the ledge, if you will. That being said, is when you're looking for some of these fish, it really goes back to kind of 3 W's in my opinion, which is water level. So when we're coming into fall, through the summer, we've had a lot of really low water where the water kind of falls out of the fishery. In the fall, we'll kind of get one more push of really kind of higher water into the fisheries, and it'll start to stabilize. And then once we start getting these cold fronts kind of barrel through, then we'll have some wind direction change and things of that nature. And what happens is obviously we have water temperature changes because we have cooling air temps. And so all these variables kind of come into play. All that to say is when I go fishing or before I even start fishing, I look at my NOAA maps and some of the, the things that are accessible to me to understand, what the environment is like even before I launch my boat. But to say that a lot of really good areas to fish have a common, or at least have proponents of each of those different four locations and where they live or types of structure, right? So rocks and seagrass. So for instance, earlier this year in spring, if you will, the water level was higher, certainly not high, but higher. We found a lot of fish up on top of the grass. So we're fishing a lot of lures and a lot of baits to kind of cover, some shallower water areas. But also too, we were working kind of these transition ledges right off that kind of lead to those rocks. Now, as it gets cooler, that might be something, especially as the water level falls out, where we can then start to kind of fish some of these rock formations and fish some of that deeper water. So I say all that to say is, even though there's different types of structure, none of them are wrong. It's whether or not, some are more productive on that particular day. And that's really kind of almost a daily decision, if you will, almost an hourly decision, because we've seen water temperatures change. When you launch the boat in the morning, it might be 52, 53 degrees. You might have some kind of sunnier days, partly cloudy. You have some daytime warming temperatures. Air temp gets up in the upper 60s, and then that water temperature might climb to 56, 57, 58. Well, that might be just enough temperature swing where those fish will pull off that deeper water and up onto some shallow water structure. Just depends on what that structure is. So again, in summary, choosing any of those areas in types of structure is certainly helpful. So again, I'll kind of, come up with this is September through December, we have such a variance, right? It's going to be mid 90s tomorrow. In December, we've had, obviously water temperatures down in the mid to, lower 50s. So autumn is kind of a broad brush stroke in terms of time of year. But if you think about, again, water temps, what bait is available, what types of structure, and what those weather patterns hold, making those decisions daily and understanding fish behavior through those types of, weather pattern changes, the water level changes, etc., might benefit you into targeting the right type of structure. So all of them are right types of structure. Some of them are just better on certain types of days. So with that, I will pause. And then again, if you have any questions, leave those in the questions chat there. But that's just a quick summary of kind of where they live, right? Because, many guides, Jay Watkins, Cliff Webbs, and the David Rouseys, and many of our guides that do this daily, and Jay is really notable, a notable guide, but he always says you got to hunt in the right ranch, right? And so if you're fishing the right type of structure, targeting some of these bigger fish, then you're hunting on the right ranch. It's then finding really where that ranch is. So I'll pause there, Adam, if you have a polling question.
All right, thanks, Chris. Yeah, we're I'm happy to put up a poll. So these polls are just for fun. Let me get this going here. Okay, so I put up the poll. So if you would answer that, that would be great. We'll give it 30 seconds. All right, we're getting there. Give it a couple more seconds. All right, let me close this up. We've had 68%.
Sweet.
All right. So I'm going to share the results. And Chris, so what what I asked is kind of a review of the first section. Where are speckled sea trout likely found from September to December? The first choice was deep water. Second was oyster beds. Third was seagrass beds, and then fourth was all the above. We had overwhelming all the above at 81%. So,
That's right.
um, but really nobody's wrong.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's just yeah, getting your mind going a little bit there. I did want to remind people you can ask questions in the question function. It may look a little bit different depending on if you're on a desktop computer or phone. On the phone, it has like a box with a question mark in it. You can click that, and then those questions will go to me. And then at the end of the session, Chris will take those on. So feel free to ask any questions throughout. Okay, I'm gonna close this up.
All right. Can you see
Yeah,
my
you're back
screen?
on. Yeah, your
Wonderful.
slideshow's.
Okay.
Oh, look at that.
Now this is great. This is by far probably my most favorite thing in terms of targeting fish. And those who participated in our programs or followed us for at least any length of time will understand that we have a huge approach or a little bit more of a scientific approach, if you will, to really understanding how these fish behave. You know, there's a book written, Silence and the Noise. My dad, I'm from Southeast Louisiana. I'm a longtime, trout fisherman. He's the best trout fisherman I know. I'm lucky and blessed to have, learned how to fish on the back of his boat. I say all that to say he had a phrase: when the cows are fishing, the feed, or when the cows are feeding, the fish are feeding. We had a myriad of different, bird feeders in our backyard, and we would study kind of bird behavior and kind of really just wildlife in general. All that to say is fish are no different. And this is really how we got after that. So I want to kind of tell this story, if you will. So those who are familiar with our citation programs, I'm sorry, you'll have to listen to this just briefly. But those who are unfamiliar with our citation programs, the short of it is it's an incentive-based program where across, really the 9 different states, so from Virginia all the way to Texas, there's a Dirty 30 program, which is really the benchmark. So 30-inch fish or above are really kind of the holy grail of trophy speckled trout fishing, if you will. And in our trophy trout citation program is a little bit more of a state-run program. And so for a Dirty 30, we would send not only the state cutout sticker, but a Dirty 30 sticker as well as a certificate. We still do that to this day. But in short, it was about amassing data to then kind of see if we can kind of connect the dots in terms of behavior agnostic of state. So that's the one citation program. We're also very understanding, again, I grew up in Louisiana, a 30-inch trout is such an anomaly there. And so 27-inch trout is certainly more attainable, but it's certainly a difficult fish to catch in Louisiana or really any other state for that matter. And so we lowered, more or less, if you will, but we wanted to recognize, because we wanted to increase the data flow for trout from 27 to 30 inches. So you would then just get really a state cutout sticker. And we've been doing really all of these programs since really 2017. And then lastly, our heavy hitters program, we're in our second full year of doing this. The long of it is, or the short of it is rather, is it's a year-long challenge. And it challenges anglers that participate in our programs to weigh in their 10 heaviest trout over an entire calendar year. So starting 1 January to 31 December, you amass basically your heaviest weight of 10, and you can cull throughout the entire year, and it's for trout over 3 pounds. So on average, that's roughly around a 22 or 23-inch trout. Some are built a little bit different, but I say all that to say that's about the size. And this is a catch, weigh, release format, and we use a digital scale. We have 3 approved digital scales, and we've amassed quite a bit of data through that as well. So I say all that to say all of those data points have kind of led us to about 3,700 data points. And what I'm getting ready to share with you isn't my opinion. It's really just the behavior of the fish. And that's what's really cool about this, right? And so you can kind of see the breakout for all of our different citation programs. For Texas, we have about 1,700 data points, which is, I'm not a statistician, but I think that's a pretty relevant number, where you can start to see at least some trends, with some outliers there, of course, but taking those into consideration, we can start to see a little bit better trend. So the cool part about this is this is recent, I believe, as of May, this particular slide. So as you can see, in the top right here, it says total catches. That the bars that are there represent a particular type of moon phase, which I'll talk about here in just a moment. As you can see, so there's obviously your new moon, then there's your first quarter, and then there's your full moon, then there's a third quarter, and it comes back to a new moon that is done in an entire month, right? What we're seeing is through the heavy hitter data is that there's a lot more feeding potential for fish 3 pounds or bigger, really in that third quarter leading into a new moon. On top of that, the second most productive time is the first quarter leading into the full moon. And so, as you would think, one, from a tidal variance, but also two, from a solunar period perspective, is that there's a little bit, again, going back to the silence and the noise, is that there's kind of ebbs and flows and feeding potential for these fish throughout the course of a fishery, and certainly over the course of a month. We then started to kind of ask our anglers to kind of say, hey, did you catch this during a major or a minor? Majors and minors associate with a solunar table. Solunar tables kind of is a prediction in terms of depending on where the moon's relation is to the earth. So, and the sun, excuse me. And so, for instance, if you have a sunrise coming up and the moon's overhead and it's kind of almost at a 90 degree, then you're in a major feeding period. If they're kind of 180 to each other, then you're in a minor period. And then kind of everything, and they typically last about an hour each time. And so we would ask our anglers. So what we found is through, our highest production month, we saw that there were significant, fish being caught during the major period. And then also what was kind of a little bit shocking to us is that actually they weren't caught in either. And so we're kind of pulling the thread on that a little bit, because I do, and many others that target a lot of these big fish throughout the different course of fisheries, from, again, Virginia, Florida, here, a lot of big trout kind of legends, if you will, really put a lot of stock into solunar periods. And they can have a lot of influence for kind of non-tidal fisheries, because there isn't a lot of kind of tidal flow to kind of push and pull water. And so these kind of majors and minors kind of almost initiate feeding for these fish in those fisheries. So I say all that to say is that's what we're starting to see in terms of how they behave. Beyond all that, I've asked kind of, actually, let me rephrase that. I had he was a student at A&M Corpus Christi, and he was doing a project, and he wanted to study our citation data. And so he came up with this, and he wanted to base it basically off of lunar age. Lunar age, again, going back to, if you think about it, the number 1 or 0 and 1 would be the new moon here, as you can see in the bottom graph. And then around that 14, 15 day, I don't know what happened to my 5 there, but that 14th and 15th day of the month, if you will, was the full moon. And then lastly, kind of towards the tail end, is back to a new moon. And what he found is, in terms of lunar age, there was a cycle throughout the course of a month, as you can see with that sine wave there, of periods of production throughout the course of a month. And then what he did on the right-hand graph is really based off of most productive to least productive day. And so we can, with some relative certainty, if you will, is that really the new moon is wildly productive. So that's 2 separate studies, independent of each other, that kind of speak to the same fact, is that the third quarter leading into a new moon, or the new moon, is the most productive. And then your second most productive is your really your first quarter leading into a full moon. And so it's really interesting to see that type of kind of fish behavior. Going further, and how this all relates, it's really cool. So really kind of hard to read here. For that, I do apologize, but not all months are created equal in terms of solunar periods or solunar activity, I should say. And so this is one indication of that. And so in the month of December back in 2018, there were, I want to say there were 4 fish that were caught over 30 inches. And in January, there were 13 that were caught over 30 inches. Taking a little bit more of a look at that, of those 4 fish that were caught in that particular month, associated with higher periods of solunar activity. And if you look even more, what is that around? That's around a new moon, and also in advance of a full moon and on the full moon itself. Now, if you look on the right-hand side, there's some kind of highlighted days. That's really the rating, the fish rating for the day in terms of, how much, solunar activity is going on. And as you can see, there's only 4 there. If I fast forward to January of 2019, there's wildly more highlighted days. And as you can see, we had a lot more production on those particular days. So I say all that to say is that fish behave in these bigger fish. Because again, if you think about it, we're looking at fish that are 27 inches, 30 inches. These are the holy grails in their respective states and their respective fisheries, is that they do behave and they do feed in these kind of windows. And we've always heard about these kind of windows, if you will. And that is, I think, one really good example that they do this. And this isn't just my opinion. This is kind of data that's telling us this, right? Going even further, which is really cool, is that for our trophy trout citation program, we had 74 data points, just for Texas. And we were looking, because when we ask our anglers to submit the fish, we ask them, 1, where they were fishing, the date it was caught, and then what they caught it on, and whether or not the fish was released. I say all that to say is that we then looked at the different types of lure or different lure types, and you can see that they're kind of across the board. Since we're talking autumn here and talking about fall fishing, soft plastics far and above, let me rephrase that, not far and above, but certainly more productive. And that could be for a variety of different reasons. One, they're certainly more accessible. When I'm talking about soft plastics, I'm talking about really like a soft plastic lure. If you're looking at me and my camera, this is just a soft-bodied soft plastic lure with a jig head. They're very cost effective. You can buy them, they're very cheap. Most anybody in terms of experience can fish them and throw them, but they're not agnostic to catching large fish. Then you get into kind of more nuanced types of baits, which are your kind of suspending style baits. Again, looking at my camera, this is a Corky Fat Boy floater. And so they have a little bit more, you need a little bit more technique, if you will. And then certainly top water is up there as well. The cool part about kind of studying all this is that, again, this isn't necessarily just my opinion. This is data showing us that, all different lure types, certainly in autumn months, can be wildly productive, not only targeting, spotted sea trout, or speckled trout, but really large speckled sea trout. So if you go back to, what we're talking about, where they live, once you find that right ranch, you can really throw what you feel and have confidence in, and know that you can get some of those big bites, because autumn is kind of one of those times a year where you can certainly do that. And so I just wanted to kind of share that with everyone here, is that really autumn is a great month. It's weird because you have winter and then you have summer, which I also equate to like a second winter, even though it's not cold. But in terms of fish behavior, they're both really harsh. Spring and fall offer a little bit more palatable one to the angler, but I think it indicates, a season of change. And as it relates to that, you have a lot more bait in the fishery. You have a lot more bait exiting the fishery in those types, or in those times of year. And so both of those, spring and fall, can be really good on both ends of the spectrum, using, soft plastics to really technical kind of, again, slow sink suspend style baits to target those big fish. So I know that's a really, really roundabout way of saying, hey, get out there, fish what you're confident in, use to the best of your ability, fish what you have confidence in, and where those fish are, and then or fish different types of structure, and then find that, and then have the confidence to do that. So I'll pause there, Adam, before we get into the next section. But hopefully that was helpful. And again, please leave us some questions or comments in the questions tab there.
Lovely. Thanks, Chris. We do have some questions coming in. Thank you all. I'm going to put up a poll.
Hey, Adam, real quick, are they
Yeah.
relative to this topic? Because I don't want to get too far, excuse me.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think they'll be good to wait.
Okay, copy.
Yeah. I mean, we have a couple, they touch on, at the front and then now, but I think we'll be good.
Okay, great.
But yeah, let me throw up a poll real quick. Okay, give you all 30 seconds or so to answer that. All right, let's give it 5 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll.
Okay.
All right, let me share it. All right, so this is going to lead into our last section here. So the question is, what's not a factor when targeting speckled sea trout? The first option is luck. The second option is disposition. And so what I meant by disposition was like, are you happy? Are you sad?
Yeah,
That's kind of what I was going with there.
Yeah.
And the third was conditions, and then the fourth was equipment. We had a 57, the most vote. That luck is not a factor. And then we had disposition at 26%, conditions at 12%, and then equipment at 5%.
I can't wait to talk about this. This is great. Okay, perfect.
And then, yeah, just a reminder, folks, you can submit a question through the question function, and then we'll get to that Q&A towards the end. So let me hide that. Okay, and then and your screen is, so you're ready to go. There we go.
Okay.
Pop
Good.
up, all right.
Wonderful. All right. So to the last section, I'm good on time, which is good because I love having a lot more Q&A. And if you follow us on, our social medias, we do a lot of live streams. We, certainly in our podcast is certainly a little less relevant, but we do have a lot of kind of Q&A. And this is really where I learned probably the most personally, but also too, I think once you have kind of just general different schools of thought and input in how people fish differently, that's good. That's really good. I mean, varying opinions and varying approaches are not necessarily a wrong way. There is no wrong way to target some of these big fish, right? Really, the only way to not target, or the only wrong way to target these fish, is by not going at all, right? My dad always said you can't catch them on the couch. There is definitely a lot of truth to that. And so anytime you can go is certainly the best time, right? But how do I catch them? So there's a little bit of an equation. I'm very kind of detail oriented, if you will, in terms of not only understanding how they behave, but now how do I catch them? I really do kind of apply a little bit, again, more of the scientific method, if you will, of how to approach these, but really it boils down to conditions plus experiment plus variables divided by luck equals the reason. I'll talk about the reason at the end, which is wonderful. But those who said luck is not, my gracious, it may seem, because we've talked about so many different data points at this point, that there's got to be some tangible way to catch them. Sometimes you can put all the chips in that corner and it never works out, and sometimes you're just going just to enjoy the day and you have a catch of a lifetime. So luck 100% plays a huge part of that role. But let's talk about each one of those, okay? And so conditions, we talked a little bit about the conditions and how rapidly sometimes that they change here in the fall months in Texas. But when I'm talking about conditions, I'm really talking about air temperature. I'm talking about wind velocity and direction. I'm talking about weather, whether or not it's sunny, it's partly cloudy, it's overcast, foggy, whatever. And then barometric pressure. So did we have a front roll through, and now we had periods of low pressure, now we're having a spike in kind of high pressure as that kind of front rolls through, and that kind of barometric pressure starts to stabilize, and then it kind of, the next front's starting to roll through, and then we'll start to kind of see a dip, X, Y, and Z. But all those are to say is understanding those conditions. So before I go out there, again, I'm understanding what the air temp, what the water temp is, what the wind direction, wind velocity is, and all these are important, because when I'm looking at wind, let's say if it's blowing out of, let's say, let's look at, I'm fishing a southern shoreline of Baffin, and the wind's blowing out of the southeast. Has it been blowing out of the southeast for days? Has it just shifted from northeast to now south? That's important, because what happens is if you had some wind blowing into that shore, you might have some bait that's been blown up onto that shore and that structure, right? So understanding, again, those types of things. Wind, also to weather, again, overcast and sunny and foggy. We start to see a lot of those really kind of gloomy, overcast, really low sky days. That really dictates really your, the color, not only water clarity, but in terms of air clarity, if you will, or how clear the day is. It dictates what type of color spectrums of my lures am I going to throw. So I take into all those considerations when I'm fishing. So that's conditions. The next is equipment. So I'm a gearhead. I love my equipment, and so when we're talking about equipment, we're talking about certain types of lures, top waters, jerk baits, soft plastics, slow sink, suspend style baits, some baits that dive just below the surface and ascend, some that hit the water and descend and sink through the column. Understanding what your bait's capability is important even before you kind of launch the boat there. Your rod, your reel, your line, for that matter, all kind of play a role into that. The lure action, I briefly touched on that. Lure color, I've briefly touched on that. And profile is huge. If I go back a couple of slides, I didn't make it a point, but if you saw in wintertime, the slow sink suspend style baits, if you look at my camera, again, I'm holding up that Corky Fat Boy floater, that Paul Brown Fat Boy floater. Looking at profile, it's much different. It has much more depth in terms of from the back to the belly, and has a much larger silhouette profile, as opposed to like a small soft plastic. This is a Little John mirror lure, Little John. It has a very small kind of profile. Even though they're the same length, they have a significant difference in terms of silhouette. Different types of silhouette can either engage a bite, or they can have too much presence and push a fish away, especially those big fish. So understanding, again, what the profile is equally as important as lure color. Okay, rod, reel, those are important. I throw both spinning and casting rods and reels. I have them behind me. I like different actions and rods for different lures. That's really getting way technical here, but I say all that to say is, working again, I'll use the slow sink suspend style baits, Paul Brown Fat Boy floaters. I like a little bit heavier action rod, a little bit heavier power rod, just because it's a heavier bait. And what that means is when a fish eats that, I can have enough power to drive those hooks home and also have a little bit of give when I'm fighting that fish, is to not lose that fish. So it's just understanding your equipment. Okay, variables. And a cool part about it is I love, some of the pictures that I have up here are stories in and of themselves that equate to really that particular day. So I'll actually pause there for a sec and talk about these particular, because again, learning through doing is important. So here we have on the screen on the left side, that lure right there is a Texas Custom Lures Double D. That's a bait that hits the water. You can twitch it down 6 to 8 inches and it'll float back to the top. And again, I showed you the Paul Brown Fat Boy floater, which again hits and then it slows, really, really slow descends. The two subsequent pictures to the right, I was on a flat and I was fishing knee-deep grass. So I needed a bait that fished higher in the water column, but they were not responding to a Texas Custom Lures Double D, even though it has the same profile. Fish is the same part of the water column. The fish, these larger fish that were kind of roaming that area, were keyed in on really a bait that was working, and then almost like it was dying, right? And so it was kind of descending back, tail backwards. And so they were really responding to that, where I couldn't get a bite at all on the other type, even though it looks a little bit of the same, right? So that's where understanding your equipment and knowing what you can offer some of these fish is important. All right, variables. We talked about moon phase and majors and minors and water temp. What we didn't really cover is bait and bait type. What I mean by that is, one, is there bait in the area? How much bait? And then lastly, what is it? Is it little killifish? Is it mullet, which are predominant through our bait systems? Is it shrimp, right? And that really dictates time of year. Again, since we're talking autumn here and talking fall, there is an abundance of bait in the fishery. And really, I think that leads to, there is no choice. There's no wrong choice in terms of, what lure to use when targeting these fish, because if you think about it, a lot of the bait migrations in the spring time frame and in the summer, they've not only spawned and hatched, but they've been prolific. They've grown, in the fishery before they either go offshore, they either go further into the estuaries or into the marsh systems that are in, and surrounding some of these bay systems. So now in autumn, everything is kind of on the market, if you will, for some of these bigger fish to eat. I think they're really, really, they're very opportunistic feeders. So if it's there, they're going to eat it. I don't think they're keyed in on a certain type of bait, as opposed to when the winter comes along. I really feel like a lot of that bait has kind of left the bait system. Also, too, I think it's thinned out a lot. And so now what's happening, I think the fish are shifting not only from eating everything, but really keying on some, larger fin fish and larger profile fish. One, because it's more nourishment. Things are a little bit more lethargic in the system. And so they're, again, opportunistic. They're very efficient. They eat when they can. They eat a lot when they can. And then again, they'll kind of go back on the bottom, lay, kind of let that food digest, and then they'll come back. And then when they're ready to eat again, depicting on kind of those majors and minors, but also to moon phase. So I say a lot to say is bait type is important, because it just depends on what different times of year are there. But I think autumn is one of those times of year where really everything's up for grabs. Depth is a variable. So again, focusing on knee deep to waist deep, or again, fishing really deep water, which is over my head. I'm right about 5'11". And so is it, really deep structure, really deep canals? Are they sitting in 10 or 12 foot of water? Are they sitting on deep rock? That also plays a huge part. We don't see that as much right now. Again, they're in so many different areas right now with so many different changes going on. That's why a lot of times this is really called a transition time, where they're just really figuring out where they want to be for the winter time. And so but I understand what depth is around me and understanding what depth that I'm fishing. Structure, we've talked about that: seagrass, oyster beds, rocks, whatever. And then lastly, water clarity. Water clarity is a huge part to that, right? If you're looking into the water, if it's sandy or milky, versus air clear, which I'll call air clear, which is you can see from basically the surface of the water down to the bottom. That has a huge play in terms of, one, those fish may be there because in the Baffin area, for instance, there aren't a lot of predators to spotted sea trout. Probably you get, you know, some dolphin that kind of come in the bay system, but for the most part, they're really at the top of the food chain. There aren't a lot of sharks. So I feel that a lot of those fish will sit up in that high grass or sit up in those shallow grass areas, mainly because they don't feel threatened. They're too big for birds of prey. They're kind of out of the way. They're not going to get eaten, so they're not exposing themselves unnecessarily in air clear water in that particular bay system. Also, water clarity is, you know, if it is dirtier water, what type of lure color am I going to throw? In dirtier water, am I going to throw kind of a really prominent, gosh, I don't have one with me, but it almost be like, let's say, an all white or an all black or an all chartreuse, like a very, very bold silhouette profile, versus where you have some really decent, you know, water quality where you can throw, you know, different shades, if you will. So it goes from light to dark, or, you know, again, looking at my screen, like a pink to a white in some sort of a contrast. But I say all that to say is understanding water clarity is important. So those are the top of the things that I consider are kind of within my control of understanding. And then if I put them all together and put myself in the right situation, am I going to catch them? And that's where luck rolls into play. My goodness, there are way too many stories here, and I'll just share the ones that are up there, the pictures that are there. So the very middle picture of me holding a fish, that was my fourth 30-inch trout. I remember that distinctly. I wrote an article about it in Louisiana Sportsman, and the reason I know that fish and fish very well is because my son was with me, my oldest son. We were fishing, just enjoying the day. If you go back to all the studies that we've done, it's probably the lowest rated day. It's the least solunar. It was in early part of September, is actually on Labor Day. And we were fishing a non-big fish spot. We just wanted to go enjoy each other's company, and we fished, and I ended up catching a really large fish on a very, very small bait. So again, that's just luck, you know, just being there at the right time, and it just happened. The one to the right, that was a little less than 32 inches. It was a little over 9 pounds. That was my fifth 30-inch trout, and I remember that distinctly because I had fished really hard. As you can see in the sky, it's very bluebird and looking, but if you looked on the other side of that camera lens, it's very odd. That was on New Year's Day, believe it or not. It looked like Armageddon. There was a front barreling in, and so we were fishing right in front of a hard front rolling through. We had a little bit of a low wind window, and the pressure was falling, and that fish had pulled up, and she ate a jerk bait. But all that to say is, look where the jerk bait and the lure is on the fish's mouth. I probably couldn't have placed that hook any better in that fish's face because it was hanging on by literally one single hook, and it just so happened to be my time to catch that fish. And I've had more pulled hooks than I've had actually landings, sadly, but all that to say is sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, and that's where luck kind of rolls into play. So, all right, so that's my equation. But I think this is the most important. It equals the reason. Certainly the fish that are pictured are the reason that I fish in terms of targeting large fish. I love them. I love the way that they look. I love how hard sometimes they are to catch and how they challenge me mentally, physically. And so, but really the reason is this, and I've shared this. I'll try not to get emotional. I do almost every single time, but the picture in the middle is my dad. And oh my gosh, I've mentioned him before. He is the reason I love fishing so much. I was, again, blessed to have, you know, grown up on the back deck of his boat in terms of watching him and learning from him of how to, you know, fish. I say all that to say he was big and a big proponent of tagging speckled trout in the state of Louisiana. To give you an idea of how productive this man is in terms of fishing, He's tagged 15,000 trout in 3 years by himself using artificial lures, tagged and released, that is, into that fishery. So he's devoted not only to conservation, but on top of that, he just loves them and he can crack them. He's good. But that's a picture of us on the left fishing in Airplane Bay in Myrtle Grove, Louisiana. And then this is us wade fishing down in Port Mansfield, enjoying a father and son. But I say all that to say is that fish in the middle that that man is holding, I'll never forget it. He joined me for my birthday. He came out. Again, he lives in Louisiana. He drove. We fished a couple of days and he drove in for my birthday to come just be with me. And he's caught, again, those 15,000 trout, let's say in 3 years. But he's never caught a big, that's his personal best, an 8-pound trout. All that to say is that was his personal best and he caught it with me. And I'll never forget how excited that man was to catch that fish. And seeing the smile, as you can see on that, and the hug that we had afterwards, understanding all these things about these fish and all the conditions, equipment, variables, why you launch the boat and why you get up in crummy weather, why you get up early, why you're fishing in the rain. All that is because we can share experiences like that. And so if you're listening to this, define that reason, whether it's being with a loved one, whether it's being with a father and son, whether it's being with the child, whether it's being with close friends and making memories. Define that reason, because that's the reason we do this and put so much love and devotion into pursuing and passion into these fish, right? And so anyway, I will close with that, and I'd really like to get into the Q&A. We have about 10 minutes left, Adam, and I'm certainly game to go a little bit longer, but I'll leave that to you, sir. So over to you.
Okay, can you hear me?
I sure can.
Yeah. So we do have some questions. We got probably 8 or 9, probably around 10 questions. So let's jump right in.
Yeah, let's do it.
And yeah, go ahead.
No, I said go for it.
And I'm assuming you can't see the questions. Is that correct?
I cannot.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with this one. So first question: do they seek warmer, shallow water the colder it gets?
Very good question. In the words of Mike McBride, it depends. It really depends, one, on how long is cold, but let's just assume, let's say the water temperatures are 52 degrees, right? We've had a real hard cold snap. The water temperature is 52 degrees. Air temps, let's say in the mid 50s, upper 50s, something along those lines. Will those fish seek shallower water to kind of, warm up? Different schools of thought. That goes back to location and types of structure. If it's a muddy bottom, if it's a dark bottom, that can retain a lot more heat. Certainly if it has more rock and more hard substrate, it can retain that heat. So that's certainly in play. But I'll say I've seen that play out literally by the hour. This past February was a great example. We had a lot of really good, we had a really hard front and the water temp was in the upper 40s. We had fish that I was catching, let's say in about chest deep. I was standing about waist deep, fishing chest deep. The water temperature didn't necessarily come up a whole lot, but the fish pulled up a whole hell of a lot. In other words, they were chest deep when we started to catch them. The gray sky gave way to a little bit bluebird. That wind started to slack off. The pressure started to stabilize. We were fishing a kind of a long tapering ledge, if you will, and it was a long grass ledge. I kind of fed to kind of some mud sand mix, again in chest deep. As that kind of day warmed up, to the person who asked the question's point, they pulled up shallower, where to the point where we were casting, gosh, almost in the water that we were wading, which is about waist deep, and they were eating hard. I mean, when we were throwing kind of Mirror Little Johns, which is a little bit larger soft plastic, I have pictured here on my camera, and when they were hitting the bait, I mean, they were knocking it, boom. And so, to the question's point, yes. I feel like they will pull up to seek a little bit warmer when they can, but it's not to say that if it stays cool and there isn't that opportunity for that water temp to warm slightly, they'll probably stay where they're comfortable. Hopefully that answers that question.
All right, thank you. So next question, does the structure dictate the lures you opt to use? Further, is there certain lures for certain types of structure?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so 100%. Gosh, I'll keep it very, very short. The water came up. I'm going fishing tomorrow and the next day, right? Wednesday and Thursday. And I go a lot. And so I'm good because I'm able to kind of see a lot more of the kind of patterns that are kind of playing out. But we had a very predictable summertime pattern. The water was low. Those fish were postured over grass. Let me rephrase that, not over grass. They were next to big grass flats because they couldn't get up on the grass because the grass was too shallow, and the water temperature was cool in the morning, but certainly they were staying a little bit pulled off because they had a lot more access to cooler water, almost the opposite of wintertime again, where again they would feed. Once that water temperature started to warm, they would pull off and go deep. So I say all that to say is they were kind of on the lines and ledges of these kind of larger grass flats, if you will. Now that the water level has come up, certainly last week and in the last 2 weeks, the water went up to over a foot. I've been throwing a lot of baits, like weedless style baits. So a lot of weedless fluke style baits on offset worm hooks, slick lures, which are kind of, again, weedless style baits over the grass. Because if you think about, the fish they were next to the structure and next to the seagrass flats. When that water came up, they got up on it because that's where the bait was. It was on top of that grass. And so I couldn't fish what I was predominantly throwing at the time over the top of that grass because I was getting hung up. So I had to shift gears and go to a little bit more of a weedless style bait. On the flip side of that, I throw a lot of lip jerk baits. I love banging. So you can see on the front, if you're looking at my camera, there's a hard style bait, hard cased. It's got a lip here that allows that bait to dive. I love fishing these around kind of rocks because, one, it not only explores lower half of the water column, but it'll prevent these hooks because it's diving chin first. It'll bang off those rocks and it'll slowly float off those rocks. So a lot of those fish that are structuring in and around those serpulid reefs are kind of meandering around kind of these bigger structures. They're kind of cruising, and all of a sudden, the banging of that lure off that rock, boom, 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 it gets their attention. So all of a sudden that fish is inquisitive and they see that slow float, give it another twitch, and all of a sudden it slow floats again. And a lot of those fish, it's a very responsive eat on some of those lip style jerk baits. So that's two examples of different types of structure dictating what you would throw, again, for that particular day. So hopefully that answers that question.
All right. It is 7:59. Let's,
Okay.
Folks, if we don't get to your question, Chris is definitely, he's open to me sharing these questions, and he will definitely get back with you. So we have your information, we have your question. We will be sending up a follow-up email with links and resources. Please consider following Speckled Truth, the networks, which is listed on the screen. And Chris, I want to thank you again for coming out and sharing this knowledge and getting people excited about fishing. Specks. Let's do one more question.
Okay.
Let's see. What color lures for different water clarity?
Sure. I love, gosh, let me see if that was actually a really good one. I have more here. I like different, okay. It's not necessarily a long answer to the question. I just want to make sure that I can accurately show the different types, and I have them here. All right, so give me a second if you don't mind, Adam, real quick. let's go right here. Okay, let's go right here. I like this one. Sorry. All right, I have my box here, and so I was hoping I'd get some of these questions. But all right, so here I have a down south lures supermodel. As you can see, it's a very, very opaque, a very dark, solid bodied color. Okay, this is a root beer hopper is what it's called, darker profile, darker bait, right? This is we call it a truth. It's literally one that we've kind of created, and I'm not trying to spin it, but it's because we fish so many different watercolor spectrums. I love a dark to light contrast on a bait because it has so much variability, and you can use it in so many different water clarity types. So if it's got a little bit of dirty water, a little bit of stain, can't quite see, maybe let's say 8 to 10 inches down. So if you're wading knee deep, if you're wading waist deep, you can see your knees. That's what I would throw that in because it's a great color. It has the darkness to it, it has the lightness to it, and so it has different shades. I love shades. To that end, though, if I'm fishing a lot of like dirtier colored water, I will throw a solid bodied color. So again, going back to the root beer hopper, where I like I don't think the color necessarily makes a difference as much as I think just the solid color profile, because I think everything is just giving silhouette. So this is another one. It's called Golden Bream. It's a darker colored bait, but if you kind of put it in light, it has a little bit of clarity or transparency to it. And so again, that's one where I'd probably throw this in some dirtier water, but it's not so dirty that it's like unfishable. So I'm just, again, given a solid silhouette profile, but I'm also kind of lightening up that. And I'll also often throw these ones that have a lot more, like this is like a blue moon or an opening night color. Again, solid bodied color. This is one I would throw in clear water. So this is like a lighter color, lighter shade. I would throw this in clear water, and it wouldn't necessarily be so overwhelming to the fish's palate that it would just kind of push them off, right? So I wanted to show the different variations. To answer the question, yes, I like, again, I've kind of shared with that. I think this is probably your most versatile. Again, having a light to dark doesn't matter on who manufactures the lure, K-Wigglers, Down South, Mirror Lure, whatever. There's a bunch of different brands that make a light and a dark like style of bait or colored bait. And in your dirtier water, I would throw a little bit more of the darker solid profile. Again, either like root beer or like, let's see, I have like a pure avocado here. Avocado red flake is a great one as well. So I like the solid bodied in a little bit more darker colored water conditions, or less water clarity, if you will. So I'll pause there.
All right. Well, Chris, thank you again. Folks out there who we will send a follow-up email in the next day with resources and links. If you did put a question in the box, we'll get that out to Chris, and so he can get that answered. Yep. Well, again, thanks, Chris. Everybody have a good night.